I'm Karen Cox, and I'm pleased to introduce our final session featured speakers, leading national academics Jeannie Sager and Jacqueline Ackerman. They'll discuss their recent research, how households make giving decisions. Jeannie Sager is the director of Women's Philanthropy Institute, which is housed under the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy in Indianapolis. WPI believes that gender matters in philanthropy and that solving the world's complex problems requires perspective, leadership, and generosity from women and men. WPI is focused on conducting and disseminating research that grows women's philanthropy. Jeannie leads WPI's efforts to translate research to practice, works closely with their National Advisory Council, and serves on the executive leadership team for the Lilly Family School. She's a seasoned nonprofit executive with 25 years of experience in healthcare, higher education, and independent school leadership. Jeannie earned her master's in philanthropic studies from the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy and bachelor's in international relations from Rollins College. Jacqueline Ackerman is Associate Director of Research at the Women's Philanthropy Institute at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. Jacqueline supports its mission to conduct, curate, and disseminate rigorous research that grows women's philanthropy by managing all aspects of WPI's research. Jacqueline joined the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy in 2012 after earning a master's in public administration from the Indiana University Bloomington School of Public and Environmental Affairs. She was raised in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and is a recent transplant to Bethesda, Maryland. Jeannie and Jacqueline, I'll turn it over to you now.
So much, Karen, for having us today. I'm going to ask Jackie to share her screen for all of us, and we can get this party started. So thrilled to be here with all of you this morning and to have had the opportunity to listen into this the amazing panel of couples and donors this morning. Again, so happy to be with you today. And thank you, Karen, for the introduction and the warm welcome. Jackie and I are excited to share the newest report in our Women Give series. This research series, along with around 24 studies the Women's Philanthropy Institute has released since 2015, have transformed philanthropy. For those of you who are less familiar with the Women's Philanthropy Institute, or as we call it, WPI, we are housed at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. And our mission is to conduct, curate, and disseminate research that grows women's philanthropy. WPI increases understanding of women's philanthropy through rigorous research and education, interpreting and sharing our insights broadly to improve philanthropy. At WPI, we envision a world where women donors understand and use their growing power and influence to support causes that they care about, where fundraisers and nonprofit leaders take women seriously and approach them in ways that appeal to them, and where both women and men are giving more, and giving more intentionally and effectively. For over more than a decade, WPI has researched the intersection of gender and philanthropy from many angles. And the bottom line is this, that gender matters in philanthropy. Women have incredible philanthropic power, but their giving is unique, and women donors and their households must be better understood. So why does WPI focus on women's philanthropy? Well, women's wealth and influence are growing. Wealth is just one way to measure the growing influence of women. They also earn more in terms of income, are rising to higher levels in government and industry, and looking at families, today's women appear to have more input in their own families than in the past. Of course, when we think about the last year and a half, we know that the pandemic has had a disproportionate effect on women and girls worldwide. So this picture may be changing when it comes to the ongoing effects of COVID, but we'll need to wait to fully understand the impact of COVID and the economic situation on women. Jackie?
Thank you, Jeannie, for the introduction. Since many of you may not know about the Women's Philanthropy Institute's research, I wanted to share a little bit of background. I think that understanding what we know about how men and women give will provide a really helpful place setting, so to speak, to the presentation today. So our research falls into three broad categories. First, these big picture questions about how and why women and men give. Second, we've conducted more focused studies on specific topics about gender differences in giving. For example, what happens to giving by men and women when they retire, life satisfaction, the intergenerational transmission of generosity, just to name a few. And then third, giving to women and girls is another strand of our research with 6 reports examining that topic so far. Women Give 2021, our topic for today, looks at how households and couples in particular make decisions about charitable giving. But first, I will briefly set the stage with an overview of some of our basic findings from more than a decade of research. So we know that first, women are more likely to give than men, and that is true across demographic factors like age and race or ethnicity, and it's also true of both online and offline giving. We know that women give more than men. It is important to note that that's holding other factors like wealth and income constant, but when you compare similarly situated men and women, women are more generous. Women are more likely to give to almost every type of nonprofit or cause area, but they do tend to spread out their giving more, and so they tend to get less recognition for their generosity. Women give for different reasons than men. Women tend to be more motivated by empathy and altruism. Men tend to be more motivated by self-interest. And I do want to clarify, it's not that men aren't empathetic, but women tend to be more socialized into helping, nurturing roles, and that bleeds over into philanthropy, and that behavior becomes ingrained. It also means that men tend to respond more to having their name on something that shows or acknowledges publicly that they gave. And then about the how, women give differently than men. Collective giving resonates with a lot of women. About 70% of all giving circles are majority women. And we also know for the high net worth donor set that these women donors primarily give through donor advised funds or family foundations. And what resonates to us is that those are areas where women are likely consulting with others or using tools to connect with family. And then just finally, WPI has done a lot of research over the last 5 years on giving to women's and girls' causes. It's an area of increased attention, especially after our own Women and Girls Index determined that these organizations receive just 1.6% of all philanthropic dollars. Before we dive into the research findings, I want to note that this is just one of many projects that WPI has conducted with the support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Just do want to clarify that we are grateful for the foundation's support of our research, but all of our research findings and conclusions come from WPI. Jeannie, why don't you tell us why this topic and why now?
Thank you, Jackie. So why now? Families have been changing in recent decades. Men and women are delaying marriage and having children, or not doing these things at all. More young adults are also living at home. And in recent decades, women's changing role within society and the family means the importance of women's income has grown. Shifting marital dynamics, including more women breadwinners and women influencing household financial decisions to a greater extent, all of these things have implications for charitable giving. And so understanding these dynamics and how they impact giving is important, since we know from Giving USA that giving from individuals and families accounts for at least 70% of all giving every year. But when you factor in bequests and family foundations, this number grows to nearly 84%. And to me, one of the key things about this subject is that it matters to so many households. We saw this in the conversation earlier today. Each household is unique and has different conversations about giving, and those conversations matter for how much households give and what organizations they decide to give to.
And from the research and data perspective, I'll just add that the last time that we asked everyday households about how they made giving decisions was 2005, which was a very different world in terms of household dynamics and the role of women within the household. So it was really important to us on the research side of things to update this important topic. So let's get right to the findings. I know that some of these have already been alluded to during our discussion earlier this morning, but just as some background, we categorized households into 4 decision-making styles. So you'll hear me refer to man decides, where the male partner in the household makes all or most decisions about giving on behalf of the household. Woman decides, where the female partner in the household is doing so. Jointly decides, where both partners are making all or most decisions together, and then separately decide, where each partner kind of has their own pot of funding and makes their own decisions for themselves as individuals. I also want to call out that unlike many previous studies in the field, WPI did include LGBTQ+ households in our survey data, and they comprised about 11% of our survey respondents. We explained this in a lot more detail in our report, but those families are categorized into the same 4 buckets. So for example, a lesbian couple could fall into woman decides, jointly decide, or separately decide, depending on how they've responded to our questions. So our top line finding here on this slide is that the largest share of households make giving decisions together. That's 61.5% of all households making joint giving decisions. So the majority, however, this is a decline from 73.4% in 2005. Jeannie, what does this tell you?
So what are the implications for this? As we heard earlier today, it's so important to talk to families. Bring in spouses, partners, others, because most couples are still deciding together. It's important to avoid making assumptions about how couples give and to go ahead and ask the question, how do you and your partner make giving decisions? There may be an opportunity for you to rethink how to engage both members of the household or the whole family, but certainly make it part of your routine in terms of understanding and asking questions about their philanthropy as you meet with them.
All right, moving right along, we know that most households make giving decisions jointly. However, sole decision making, when one partner makes all of the giving decisions for the household, is on the rise. And when one partner in the household does make those decisions, it's more likely to be a woman. So in 15.3% of households, the woman is the sole giving decision maker, compared to 12.1% of households where the man is the sole decider. So overall, looking over 15 years, in 2005, about 10% of couples had one partner make all of the giving decisions, but in 2020, that was actually closer to 30%. So we're looking at really a huge increase in sole decision making.
And so, as with so much of what our research shows, it is imperative that you engage women in conversations about giving. Make sure they are at the table and don't assume that you know who the decision maker is. To think about the research a little deeper, if you consider that 15.3% of households have women as the sole giving decision maker, and 61.5% of households are making giving decisions together, that means nearly 90% of household giving decisions involve women in some way, shape, or form. Jackie?
Thank you, Jeannie. As we talked about quite a bit during the panel, individuals have different thresholds for the size of gift they will give without consulting their partner. It sounds intuitive, right? If you're going to give 20 bucks to the Girl Scouts on your way out of the grocery store, less of a need to call your partner and make sure that's okay. But as our panelists discussed, if you're giving thousands of dollars or feel led to give, you would at least check in probably. I do want to highlight that the numbers you see on the screen, these are for kind of your average American household. So it wouldn't be surprising to find that a high net worth donor would have different thresholds or higher thresholds. But do know that the key gender disparity still exists. And it turns out that the dollar amount for men on average, where they feel the need to talk to their partner before giving, is almost 3 times higher than for women. Jeannie, what's that tell you?
Well, there are many implications for the different types of audiences, right? So for fundraisers, know the people you are working with. And we heard this throughout the session this morning from the couples. Each of those couples had a unique way of kind of determining dollar amounts. And so when you're doing your strategy, kind of accept that they need to think through larger asks and do your research to understand what those thresholds might be. As donors, ask yourself, is this true of you? Why or why not? I really appreciated seeing the couples process this question live this morning. I think that was very interesting. As we heard, a lot of times this is unsaid in households. So have you discussed this, and have you set a threshold for yourselves? By discussing this, this may free you up to say a more spontaneous yes if asked about something that you care about. Jackie?
Thanks, Jeannie. So to better understand how people think about their giving decisions, where does charitable giving kind of fall on the gamut of household financial decisions, we compared a lot of different types of these decisions. There are plenty of takeaways, as you can see, that we can learn about gender roles in household finances. But when we focus in on the philanthropy, we found that overall charitable giving seems most similar to how households also think about short-term financial management. Jeannie, what does that say to you about fundraisers and how we need to ask donors?
Well, for most households, this means that giving might be treated like a monthly bill, right? So giving decisions may be more transactional and not involve deep thinking about impact and strategy, which we learned from the panel is very important to donors. Given this reality, how can fundraisers meet everyday donors where they are and engage them at the level that they want, while still aiming to increase giving? Another question, how can you raise a donor's sights and create conversations that elevate your mission to something less transactional and more transformative for the donor? Discussing giving plans and involving more family members in these conversations may be the key to building deeper, longer lasting relationships. And also creating opportunities for conversations about planned giving, which we know allows donors to shift their thinking from cash to assets. And speaking of assets, Jackie?
Yes, thanks, Jeannie. We found that just 1.1% of couples talk about their giving with a financial or philanthropy advisor. Now, just this is for the broader population. We know that high net worth households might be more likely to talk to a financial advisor, but the key issue is here. This is such a small percentage, and a lot of advisors, we know anecdotally and through research, that they don't talk about philanthropy even if wealth advisors are engaged. And so this is clearly a huge opportunity for these advisors to engage clients about an issue that ties really closely to values.
Yeah. So some questions to think about here from different perspectives. So for donors, are you doing this? Is there value to it for you? Advisors can often tell you about tax advantages to giving or how to time your giving. For nonprofits, are you the trusted advisor of some donors? And are you embracing that role and living up to that responsibility? Are you encouraging your donors to talk to advisors about how to maximize their giving? I often share with fundraisers that for so many donors, you are their philanthropic advisor. They see you as no different than speaking to their attorney or to their accountant, they see you as the professional in this space. For advisors, are you supporting your clients in their philanthropy? So many advisors are hesitant to do this because in theory, giving away money means their clients are investing less. And this is not what they have been trained to do, right? So if their clients are investing less, you're earning less. Our research, though, shows that actually clients are more likely to stick with an advisor that talks about giving and appeals to their core values of generosity. And this is especially true for women, who, by the way, often inherit twice, once from their families and next and then from their spouses. And then also for the younger generation that's inheriting trillions right now. So create meaningful opportunities to help your clients think more strategically about their philanthropy.
All right, our last finding, although there's plenty more depth in the report to be sure, is a good one. It's 3 out of 4 couples agree on giving amounts and recipients. We know that most couples talk about their giving at least a few times per year. And what this finding really told me is that there's general satisfaction with the status quo. You've got a very small number of couples that express any sort of angst or dissatisfaction with the way that they decide about giving. And so this seems to be that rare area of finances where couples get along and don't experience friction. Jeannie, what do you think that tells us about how to connect with donors?
Again, this was laid out to us and modeled by the panel discussion this morning, right? So giving is a way to connect. Money is an area where couples often argue, but philanthropy seems to be a sweet spot where you're talking about money, but you're also talking about values and having a good conversation. You can connect with your partner, your parents, your kids, and grandkids. And even if you don't agree on all the issues, there are so many opportunities to find where your values and philanthropic priorities do overlap and bond over those. So whether couples give together or separately, there is real joy that comes from intentionality around giving. For fundraisers, remember, giving is a positive thing for donors. When you ask someone to fund your cause, the research shows that you are helping them connect with their families, live out their values, and ultimately live more satisfied and fulfilling lives.
Thank you, Jeannie. I'll just share this quote from Deb Mesh, who is our former chair in women's philanthropy. She led this study and our research for many years. She says, giving has the potential to bring households closer together, especially when partners are strategic and intentional about their philanthropy. Women Give 2021 presents an opportunity for families to connect over shared values, explore how they give, and to embrace the joy that comes from giving. Jeannie, take it away.
And we can't emphasize this enough. At WPI, we know that connection, growth, and joy come when people give together. And we hope that this report promotes that togetherness and joy. So to close the research presentation, we wanted to share some big picture takeaways to provide some questions for reflection. And I know that there are a few questions for us to discuss in Q&A as we wrap this up. But Women Give 2021 shows that most people seem relatively satisfied with their giving. For the general population, giving decisions may be more transactional and not involve deep thinking about impact and strategy. Given this reality, how can fundraisers meet everyday donors where they are and engage them at the level that they want, and while still aiming to increase giving? Discuss giving plans and involving more family members in these conversations is again key to building these relationships. First, for all of us for those of us on the donor side of things, thinking about this research and how does this fit with your family's approach to giving? For fundraisers, how can you tailor your approaches to donors depending on how their households make giving decisions? The overall takeaway from this research shouldn't be to ask only certain types of households for giving, say separate or man deciding households, since presumably they take less work and you have to communicate with fewer people, right? You need to be reaching out to all types of couples and households to fulfill your mission. And we hope our research will show you how to talk to couples rather than which couples to talk to. And when we think about financial or philanthropy advisors, and I count fundraisers again in this group because so many of you fill this role for many of your donors, how can you help the couples and families you serve to be more intentional about their giving? And Jackie, I'll give you a chance to share with the group how a resource for them in making and having these conversations.
Great. Thank you, Jeannie. That is a brief overview of Women Give 2021. I will drop a couple links in the chat to the report, and we have a nice one-page infographic as well as our social media channels where we talk about all of our research and current stories that tie into it. So look for those links here in just a minute. I do want to highlight our giving plan worksheet in particular. It's a simple worksheet to guide a conversation between a couple, whether you're just beginning your philanthropic journey or you have a well-established way of doing things. The worksheet helps you think through your own values and the giving that you're currently doing and whether it fits into your ideal values and any changes you need to make to fulfill your goals in your giving. I want to note it's for couples and it's for donors, but it can certainly be used or modified by fundraisers and financial or philanthropic advisors to use with your clients and your donors. Thank you so much to this group for having us, and I will turn things back over to Karen for a few minutes of questions and answers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeannie and Jacqueline. This was great information. I liked especially how you gave provided the practical, some practical steps we can take with our donors. A couple of questions that were sent to us in advance, but one of them is, did you find a difference or did you measure this in attitudes about giving in households where only one spouse worked professionally?
While this report, and Jackie, you can correct me on this, doesn't allow us to answer this questions that specifically, you know, a related question that arises in particular for WPI is around the challenge of seeing women as donors when women don't feel that they have ownership of the family money. And we kind of got into that this morning, right, with the panel session. It was a theme that came up a little bit. And so as all of you who are on the front lines know, this may be particularly, might be the case if women have never worked outside of the home or in a lot of instances have given up careers to focus on the family, right? So what I'd say is that this report, again, encourages conversations among couples to help overcome this challenge and find agreement. And certainly support and elevate the roles that they play within their family, the important role, right? So, and we know that with the pandemic, many articles have recently come out with men working from home, finally realizing the value of all the labor their partners have managed and continue to manage. So while we can't answer that specifically, I think what's important about this report is that it is a much needed update from 2005. And I think there are some interesting implications moving forward, especially the rise in the number of separately deciding households. I think we can infer some things about the dynamics of that household in particular. So Jackie, anything to add to that?
I think you're right on. Unfortunately, we did not answer this question specifically in Women Give 2021, but we do know that there are all sorts of dynamics over where the money comes from And that matters for how the money is spent and who feels more ownership and control over where the money can go. So that certainly is something that matters, and generally favors men. And so it's certainly something for all of us to keep in mind.
Great, thank you. So another question, was there any aspect of the research that surprised you, or what surprised you most?
I can take a stab at that one, Jeannie, and then add whatever you think. To me, it was actually the rise of the single decision maker. In my mind, thinking about how the younger generations have come up and developed and gotten into families, at least the ones that I know anecdotally, they're very egalitarian. So I honestly expected like joint decision making will just shoot up. And so to have joint decision making, still the majority use this way of making their giving decisions, but the rise of the singles did surprise me. I think the way that it works and kind of fits in with what I'm seeing in real households is tied back into this attitude of charitable giving as a task, as an everyday financial decision, similar to a bill, but probably one that makes you feel better about life. And just maybe households do more of a task sharing. So I handle the charitable giving, you pay the bills, you call the plumber, you take care of the cars, etc. So that's kind of how I resolve it, but that was surprising to me. Jeannie?
Yeah, I would just add that, the report in and of itself just provides a much deeper information about the process of making household giving decisions. And we were able to ask some questions for which we didn't have any previous baseline for comparison. So now moving forward, we're going to be able to track this in a different way. And so again, what Jackie said, being able to add greater detail about other household financial decisions. And we hadn't really dug into these conversations about giving and who is involved. So I think that's what I'm so pleased about with regards to the research.
Great. Well, another one, if you conducted this research in 5 years, if you just had to guess where this was trending, or what do you think? Where do you think this is all going?
I can take this one, Jeannie, if you want, as the researcher and someone who's thought, what could we do with this in the future? I think we have a few priorities for future research, both for ourselves and that we'd recommend to others. First, different household structures. As you probably noticed, I referred to couples a lot. That is, most households have a couple in place, but that's not necessarily the case in all households. So we have plenty of data still to analyze about, whether it's adult siblings living together, adult kids living with their parents, all of these different configurations of households. We really want to dive in there because a lot of studies just kind of look at the standard nuclear family, and we know that that is not the average family in 2021. Second, I would say different ways of measuring generosity. We looked here at dollars given, but our other research shows that it's really important to look at generosity as a spectrum of actions, whether it's giving money, time, talent, your other resources. And so I'd love to be able to see how people make decisions within their households about where to dedicate that time, that network, etc. And then finally, just different time periods. We've heard about the SHE session. We measured how households make decisions in the thick of a pandemic and an economic downturn. It's really hard to tell, if women are losing jobs and incomes and choosing to stay home choosing to stay home because they have to take care of kids during this challenging time. It could be that we just happen to be measuring at the lowest ebb of women's decision making in quite some time. So it's hard to tell. I would love to revisit this question in the coming years and see what that pattern is over time.
Okay, I think we're about to wrap up. I just real quickly, I think you've given us so much to think about, not just in terms of professionally, but personally. It wouldn't surprise me if many of us go home and start really thinking about this. Have the results of this research changed your personal views about discussing money, including charitable gifts? And has it made the discussion of money more open and a supportive process in your own households?
That's a great question, Karen. For me, it emphasizes, again, how important it is for couples to include charitable giving and philanthropy when they're talking about money, especially given that the research shows that couples are really supportive of each other in this space and can even encourage each other to give and do more. And to Jackie's point, this idea that so often we're just paying the bills and having to try and find, there's some statistic that says there's really only 26 minutes in a week where couples actually are able to connect and engage. So time is limited, and philanthropy can be something that brings you closer together. So find a way to be intentional about it as a couple.
Nice.
I'll briefly say that honestly, I already was in charge of the giving in our household. That's what happens when you're an expert in philanthropy. But I have talked to a lot of my colleagues and friends about the research, and some of them have just said oh, we don't really talk about that, or oh, I do this, but we don't really talk about that. And it just reinforced to me, looking at their giving as well, that not talking about something is a decision. It might happen naturally, that you're not talking about this, but no decision and no action is still a decision. And so if you're not satisfied with how the giving is going in your household, it really does take your conversation, but overwhelmingly those conversations are going to be positive and bring people in a household together.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you both of you for this great session and for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So right now, I will turn it over to Scott Helm with UMKC, and he'll have closing remarks for us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Karen. Thank you to our presenters. They're no longer, our panel this morning is not with us anymore, but grateful for them. And, I was sitting here throughout the course of the day, just trying to, listen to understand things a little differently, and the connections I was able to begin to think about and make are, we kind of started out with the micro, right? Like what goes on in a given family dynamic, how giving decisions are made, particularly with a given set of donors, right? That are oftentimes large gift donors. And then you have the research here at the end, which I think is beginning to make inroads into something that I think is probably critically important and that we've lacked in the nonprofit sector from a model perspective for some time, which is how do we begin to think about different types of individual giving? When I say individual, I mean like the family unit giving, it begins to give a macro landscape of how we can probably begin to think about it. And these work together, right? So when you think, I think about what goes on within a family unit, we may generalize it for research purposes, but then we'll get better and better at understanding what are the subcategories of those initial categories of joint giving decisions versus women-led decisions versus separate decisions. But this work strikes me as so vitally important to kind of even just laying out what that landscape of possible decision groups are, and then we can better understand. The thing I would encourage everybody to think about is what tools do you have from an engagement perspective to not assume a certain behavior based on initial conversations, but using the information that was provided here to inform your engagement and what types of questions you can ask as you're building relationships with donors or families, that allows you to better get a feel for how they want to give, how they'd like to give, how they'd like to be engaged, and the comfort level that they may have with sharing, respecting kind of their giving traditions within their family norm. So I think it's important we don't go too far and say, well, if they make the decision together, then we'll get a bigger gift. So let's try and get them together, when their family culture may be the opposite. It may be important to them for a variety of reasons that I think Jacqueline was talking about, the different generations. It could be a variety of these things. So let's not use this, in my opinion, from the perspective of forcing people to do what we want, but to get a better relationship with our donors that leads to long-term giving relationships, and that maybe uses as an opportunity to tear down stereotypes we may have as we go into the giving practice and relationship building. So those were some of the thoughts I had. Obviously, I think like most of us, there's probably more questions than answers in any of these giving conversations, but I think we can all be excited to know that this work's being done with Lily, and that, in the not too distant future, we'll have even a better understanding. We have a better understanding today based on the work they're doing, but even better in the years to come of those relationships, which will take out some of that ambiguity and uncertainty that's related to gift cultivation in this sector, which this is long overdue. So very glad that we could share this with our community. Finally, thanks to our partners at Heartsook. I think this is a second one of these we've done. I think it's been a nice opportunity for us. They carry a lot of the weight on the programming that comes forward in these morning sessions, and we're grateful for their relationships and their thoughts on how to do that. From a Midwest Center perspective, we've really oftentimes, our work has largely been in the area of leadership and strategy. And while we have had programming in the past and currently as it relates to fundraising and development, we value the partnership they have as it relates to some of the, they do this every day, and it's really important. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that one of the areas where we have some overlap, and we're really excited here coming in October, we'll be launching a new fundraising leadership program, which we think is the best of what we offer with the needs of the community. We co-created this with 40 nonprofit professionals, and we asked them, what do you need when it comes to development? And what they came out with was, we need better leadership training for development people. That this can't just be about the tactics of giving, but this is about, how do I lead from the development space? And so in this cohort program series of fundraising professionals, we'll be looking at, managing up, building a culture of philanthropy in your organization, how to get other people in the organization to help you build that culture of philanthropy, strategic, how to develop strategies within the development function that align with organizational strategies, financial management, being a part of that conversation, which is so critically important as the big resource generators. We'll be looking at talent management. How do you build the best possible development team within your organization? And also communications and telling your story. Storytelling is so critically important, but oftentimes that falls on the development people to also be your kind of chief spokesperson in the community. How do you help build that competency and capacity within your organization? We're very excited about this programming. We're excited about how we built it with the community, and I think it's just a great opportunity to continue forward with topics like we're having today, and equipping people with the tools necessary to engage better. So we're very, very thankful for the time that our community always gives. I know I speak for our partners at Heartsook, who also are grateful for the time you give. 3 hours is not an easy ask at any time. We hope you found the value in this and the enjoyment in it that we enjoy doing it with you. So thank you.